licensed professional forester. He received the United States Forest Service 2001 Director's Award for Excellence and the Maine Forest Products Council 2018 Presidential Award. It's my real pleasure to offer Ken our distinguished Alumnus Award from the School of Resources. Ken, please come. If you've had to see it. In front of Benning Hall, for longer than the building was here, there was a large elm tree that received the name the Campana elm because the Campana helped save the elm tree from Dutch elm disease. Unfortunately, this summer, decay and time had taken taken away the life of the tree, and they had to cut it down in August. But we salvaged some of the wood, so the wood on the plaque here is from the Campana elm that for so many years stood in front of Benning Hall.
It may not be done drying. Whatever.
So how did I get here? I grew up in a dairy farm in, of all places, New Jersey. In the mid-60s, the New Jersey legislature effectively put my father out of business by outlawing the retail sale of raw milk. At that point in time, I also happened to meet a former hired hand of my father's who was a forest ranger from the state of Washington. So between my agricultural experiences in youth and my contact with him, I saw forestry as a career that I would find, that I would like. So I came up here to the University of Maine. 52 years ago, sitting right here, first class, Forestry 101. 100 of us in the chairs. Professor Edwin Giddings popped in and standing here, and he says, look to the left, look to the right. 2 out of 3 of you aren't going to make it through the program. That was pretty much of a downer to students who are aspiring to become professional foresters. Most of us persevered and graduated. The education I got here from my bachelor's degree allowed me to get my first job. It was a wonderful education, grounded in both science, research, field experiences that allowed me to hit the ground running with whatever I was asked to do. Initially for a company, Asplund, where I was a right-of-way foreman. I was supervising French-Canadian crews in Ohio, cutting right-of-way for new high-power transmission lines. That job went to pieces in September because of the recession. Concurrently, I had been asked to come back and interview here in Maine with Great Northern Paper Company. I eventually was hired by Great Northern Paper Company as their development engineer. Started January 1, 1975. Heavily involved in helping that company decide what choices to do for mechanical harvesting equipment. How do we harvest 5-inch balsam fir that are 800 trees per acre? My agricultural background with tractors and dozers helped me in that job because I was doing time studies, I was trying to figure out efficiencies, trying to come up with a maintenance schedule. How do we make mechanical harvesting effective, efficient in those small diameter stands? We were successful. It took several different choices of equipment over the years. It took a training program to train operators on how to do it. Not only daytime, but nighttime. I was an assistant foreman for a 5-year period. One of my stories is I was supervising my job, driving around, checking on my operators and equipment, and this car flashes lights at me as I was driving by. So I stopped, got out of the truck. A couple sitting there in the car. They slowly rolled down the window, and the gentleman turns to me and says, "There's lights out in the woods. Are those aliens?" And I reassured them, no, that was just my crew doing their normal job. You know, at 11 o'clock at night, they still have another 4 hours to go before the end of shift. So after mechanical harvesting, I came back into timberlands and forestry. Started to help develop policy for management, policy for data collection. How are we going to manage the spruce budworm epidemic in terms of not only our current wood supply, but what is the future wood supply based on the budworm epidemic? That took a lot of thinking, and it took a lot of experimenting as we learned about models. Bob Seymour was one of our initial contacts with a model, the Greenwoods model, in trying to understand the dynamics of the budworm. So I became a bit of a data analysis. I was in charge of our CFI system. Great Northern Paper, since the early 50s, had always had a permanent plot system spread across their timberlands. In the 80s, it converted from fixed plots to variable radius plots. So I was in charge of hiring students for summer jobs. Some of them didn't know how to spell on their resume and got called on the carpet for it. But they learned how to collect data, collect it reliably, so that it could be used by the company to help make decisions. In the 1990s, in a period of 4 years, I worked for 3 different companies. Great Northern Paper Company, Georgia Pacific, Boar. It was a trying time to be a forester in the woods of Maine because you didn't know if you had a job the next day, and if you did, who the company was. To counteract that, I started a master's program in 1990. And I believe I hold the informal record for the longest time to complete a master's program. I started in 1990 with a Master's of Science. I finished in 2010 with a Master's of Forestry. In 1999, after I had successfully sold 2 transactions, in one land sale, I sold 1 million acres to J.D. Irving Company. In another land sale, I sold 600,000 acres to what was then known as Wagner Forest Land. That left my company with only 400,000 acres, and I didn't see a very good future for my skill set. At the time, the Maine Forest Service had just opened a brand new position that had been approved by the legislature. It was a position called biometrician. I applied because nobody in the Maine Forest Service had the skill set they were looking for. I was hired for that position, so I became the first biometrician in the Maine Forest Service and served in that capacity for almost 20 years. As biometrician, or as a colleague at the Maine Forest Service called, I was the biomagician because I did magical things with numbers. I was the go-to person for phone calls, for emails, for people wanting to know information about Maine's forest resources. So that was the fun thing, was I never knew what the next phone call would bring, what the next email might ask me. And my challenge was to take my knowledge, to take my analytical skills of the data, and regurgitate that out to something that the person asking the question could use to help them make the decision they wanted to make or to gain the knowledge they wanted to gain. Communication is one thing foresters struggle with, because we much rather, as Mike said, speak for the trees than speak to people. So over my career, it's been rewarding, both in terms of what I've done, and more importantly, with the people I've worked with. Mike Dan, Pat Stroud, Bill Livingston, Bob Seymour, and several others in the company, in the crowd here. I have served in my professional society. I was a late bloomer to that. I didn't really get involved until the late 90s. And that was because somebody asked me to serve in a position. So never be afraid to ask somebody to help if you have an organization that needs help. I've served on both within the state level, the regional level, and I've served on several national committees for SAF. I'm proud of my professional society and what it represents, and I'm proud of my efforts to help it be a strong society. So it's been a wonderful career, no regrets. It's been fun, it's been challenging, and I'm still, according to my wife, way too active with my forestry activities.